you guys doing? So, bad news, I'm not a storyteller. Sorry, I'm an entrepreneur. I do have a story to tell, and it's a story to sort of paraphrase Mike Tyson about what happens when you have a plan and you get hit in the face. You know, you guys have all heard that quote from Mike. And I'd also like to talk about, to continue the boxing kind of metaphor, how I ended up getting in the ring in the first place. And I know a lot of you guys are involved in education, and at the end, I hope to have a few minutes left to go back and talk about how I managed to get into the entrepreneurial track. I wasn't birthed fully formed as an entrepreneur who raised, you know, tens of millions of dollars and has been trying to transform regional air travel over the course of the last 13 years. But to get started, I wanted to bring up on the screen here the first page of the Harvard Business School case that was written about linear air just about 10 years ago. In fact, I presented at BIF3 on this business model 10 years ago. I had learned to fly, became a pilot, had been an entrepreneur working in the internet days back in 96 through 2000 or so, and became aware of a small class of new jets that were being developed, literally billions of dollars being poured into the development of these jets. The main one of which was a company called Eclipse Aviation, started by some guys who had been at Microsoft, so very tech savvy, also were able to get a lot of capital. They raised about $1.5 billion to produce these new small jets that were leveraging sort of a step function advance in engine technology to bring down the size of a small jet engine so that jets themselves could be scaled down. So these new jets were 4-passenger jets, kind of like riding in a nice SUV or a luxury automobile. And there were a lot of folks much about, but there were a couple of other airlines for many years, and obviously a little different in terms of raising some capital and building businesses previously, but not at the same scale. You know, titans of industry ability to their own resources. And in fact, and be able to leverage what we know about using the internet to build and maintain customer relationships. So where Edge Akabuchi had raised $70 million in funding. And we got started with a proxy aircraft, and our model was sort of traditional charter where someone charters the whole airplane. Offered trips to our customers at about the same price on our proxy aircraft as we expected they would have in the future. So we got into business and we got started. Everything went away. Everything went away. 2008, the global financial crisis came along. They went out of business after $1.5 billion, which we had 4, and Dayjet had 24. And that was Bob Crandall's company. They had 5 in an IPO to kind of get themselves going. Obviously, they shelved that. Mr. Crandall retired to Gloucester. And so there we were, no coattails to ride, and at that point we had been punched in the face, you know, to have that analogy, or really another piece of the analogy. So we were sort of left with, you know, what do we do? You know, and kind of go away. But we sort of looked at what we had with prior company experience, starting an internet marketing company in the late 90s, to remember that time and how the internet bubble burst. A couple of rounds. The first round of layoffs was 80, cut 35 more people, and went down to 50. People went down to 50. Managed to, line was 7 million, 7 million, 7 million, losing 13 and then getting to 13 and then getting to break even. So going through the experience that I was able to bring to the table in 2008 when Linear Air and the air taxi business needed 5 employees down to 7. We turned our large commercial leasing company, but with individual, you have a choice. Here are the we had individual, you have a choice. Here are the keys. Here are the keys, or is the primary means of financing. And then when they're not using it, gained, got into the ring. The ability we had survived this, and so we. And so we sort of, there was this opportunity to create this air taxi business, to provide the cost of a private air travel experience down to a level the airline traveler driving. And in the intervening period between 2000, technical advances in small aircraft continued to march along, and less expensive to fly than the VLJs and the Eclipse jet continued to develop their capabilities. So for example, every propeller airplane produced by every manufacturer, and that means that all of those old pedostatic airplanes, which it's basically Microsoft, by having computers in the airplane, satellite weather, you get together. So these small airplanes are tying in autopilots and so forth. And so what we saw commercially under the charter rule, about 1,500 of them, in fact, about 1,500 of them, in fact, are investors in this model that we have. However, we have an idea. We have a pivot strategy, and that strategy is to build and maintain customer relationships and process transactions, put it into a new company, ownership of the new company be the old company, plus some capital to then develop. So today, if you go that has lots and lots of different options. So I just ran this the other day. It's a Providence to Ithaca trip. It's a really difficult drive. It's a really difficult airline flight if you want to do it. And with 2 or 3 or 4 people traveling, you can bring the price point down to, well, listen, happens to be 11. We typically will see it in the neighborhood of $800 or $900 per person, which, while expensive, would be $15,000 as opposed to a couple $1,000 for the last few years. We've been able to a couple of money in the United States into our marketplace. We've connected the other side of the marketplace to an internet travel site, to arrange their travel to here if people came from out of town. So that's the way in which people buy travel, and so to sort of fish where the fish are to those internet travel sites. So we've been on Kayak and another smaller site called Herp. Fit into what are called global distribution systems that all the travel providers, airlines, rental cars, hotels, cruise lines, they feed their data through these global distributions and online travel agents like Expedia, Orbitz, Travelocity, and so forth. And it's a little bit of a square peg round hole because, you know, all that data selling seats, where what we're selling is whole planes sort of on demand. We figured out how to do that with Kayak, and after an 18-month development cycle, literally this week, we were the first ever charter company. So 2018 is going to potentially be a significant increase in growth for us as we go from having limited access through Kayak to very expanded access through all of the potential distribution channels. And this has the potential to be a multi-billion-dollar marketplace. There are about $140 billion that gets spent in the United States on air travel every year. And regional trips of this nature, for which people are sort of willing to spend a premium based upon current airline spending for full coach, business, and first class, is about 10 to 20 billion, depending upon which numbers you like. But we only need $1 billion or so of that. So it's a very large market opportunity, and it's one that hasn't been able to be tackled previously. And I think it's primarily because of these technical connections. So, you know, I imagine very few of you are probably aware that, you know, you could charter, you know, a small prop-driven airplane to get you, you know, from one place to another. And that lack of awareness has been, you know, what we've been able to sort of address by making these technical connections and getting it set up. So as a result of that, you know, we've made the Inc. 500 this year based on our 4 you know, past years. We're actually number 244 on the list, pretty proud of that. And we're in the process of going out and raising a first round of institutional capital to talk about, you know, how we grow this thing even further. So, you know, that's that story. I mean, you know, I thought about coming up and apologizing even more about just being you know, an entrepreneur as opposed to someone with an amazing, you know, emotional, heart-rending story like all of what we've heard, you know, this morning and over the last couple of days. And, you know, but so I sort of started thinking about a little bit more expansively, you know, kind of, as I said at the outset, kind of how I got in the ring, right? And how I got to the point where, you know, I was able to be an entrepreneur. And so I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky in the 60s and 70s. In the 60s with the space program, that's how I sort of cultivated my passion for aviation. And, you know, my dad was a postman. I had 4 brothers. I went to Catholic school. And when I was in high school, I got connected with a program called Junior Achievement. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Junior Achievement. JA is almost 100 years old. It'll be 100 years old in 2 years. And it's basically a program around, you know, extracurricular, trying to teach kids, all ages now, but when I was in it, it was focused on high school, about free enterprise and capitalism. And in those days, it was mostly about what was called the company program. So advisors would come in from a company, and they would work with kids, and they would kind of help them create a company and run it over the course of a semester or a year. And that really sort of opened my eyes to the potential, right? You know, my dad was a postman. I was going to school with guys that probably weren't going to go to college. And it opened my eyes to the possibilities that, hey, you know, I could be an entrepreneur. I could start a company and be involved in this. And another sort of real point of inflection happened for me in high school when one of the teachers there, it was a Catholic school, they were taught by the same order that teaches at Notre Dame. No one from my high school had ever gone to Notre Dame. And this particular teacher said, why don't you go to Notre Dame? I was like, well, I'm going to go to U of L like everybody else, right? You know? And he said, no, let's go up and check it out and see if you, and so I ended up going to Notre Dame, which was a huge another like putting me into, you know, propelling me to another level. After I graduated from ND with the classic entrepreneur's degree of accounting, you know, I decided that my thinking there was that accounting is sort of the language of business, and so it actually has been pretty good to be able to sort of read a financial statement and be able to make projections and so forth. But I spent a couple of years sort of, working for Price Waterhouse, now Price Waterhouse Coopers, and I got a phone call one day from one of my friends from high school. We didn't go to high school together, but I met him through junior achievement. He was at Harvard Law School. He said, Billy, if you don't like what you're doing, why don't you apply to Harvard Business School? I was like, well, that sounds easy, right? So he said, I tell you what, if I walk across the river and have him send you an application, will you fill it out? And I was like, well, sure. So I did at the very last possible minute. I didn't get in the first time. I was waitlisted, which was actually a good thing because in the intervening one-year period, I met my wife, and so that's been a good thing too. Leaving that off to the side for the time being, I got into Harvard Business School. I came out to Boston, and after I graduated in 1989, I was then able to, with all of that sort of behind me, to put myself on the entrepreneurial track. And I've been successful and lucky in making additional connections over that time to be able to raise capital and put ideas out there and be in disruptive industries and be able to push ideas forward. And I sort of look back in terms of like the things that have the things that have kept me going during the downturns have really been, thinking about, my commitments to those people who supported me and how, they instilled in me the passion to kind of move forward. And so as I looked at the people who were in attendance here and your involvement in education and in government, I wanted to just tell my story about how I kind of got to be here. And thank you for your continuing commitment and urge you to continue on. So, guys like Talik yesterday, when he got a standing ovation, it made me, brought me back to my days of that sort of thing, and it really, filled me with gratitude and with pride, and I really appreciate what you guys did for him yesterday, and I know he appreciates it too. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks all. Appreciate it, man.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh my God.